I work for All Covered, and All Covered is a national MSP. We're one of the largest MSPs for small and medium-sized businesses. And I've been with All Covered for over 22 years, and I'm on a team of national subject matter experts, where I lead the direction of all things Mac, including developing new Mac solutions, coming out with new Mac training content, setting the Mac standards and best practices, and I also serve as the highest escalation point for our customers. We have several hundred engineers in our organization, field and remote, and if they cannot resolve a Mac issue, it's escalated up to me. We have a unique escalation process where I help the engineer come up with a solution instead of just taking it over. And that training goes a long way, where I don't get that many escalations. And I consider myself a Mac support generalist, and I'm passionate about teaching others my methodologies. So, I've got a lot of people in this room who have a decent understanding of Apple's LaunchD system to some degree at least, but examining the contents of LaunchD plist files may be foreign to you. So that's really the end goal of my session today, and that is to share my experience with how to quickly reverse engineer third-party LaunchD plist files, and to add this to your support skills bag of tricks. For when it comes to identifying troublesome leftover baggage from previous macOS upgrades, or maybe even identifying adware or malware. And this is frequently one of my go-tos when it comes to advanced troubleshooting when I'm dealing with intermittent Mac stability problems. And one of the things I love about teaching support topics at conferences like this is that although I have a solid understanding of the subject matter, I embrace the fact that I don't know every single thing about it. And I hope you all walk away with at least a couple of new tricks. But I also expect to walk away from this conference learning a few things that I didn't know. And I actually picked up a few things yesterday that I incorporated into the slide deck you're going to see. So please speak up to me after this session if you feel I've missed something, or if you have a brilliant way of doing something that I did a different way. Not only do I welcome it, I'll also update this deck before it goes out to everyone. So today my session is all about launch daemons and agents. And I'll begin with an overview of how the LaunchD system works, including how LaunchD loads the daemons and agents, what they're used from, and where they come from. And then we'll dissect a few LaunchD plist files, including modifying a couple using some different methods. Then we'll create a simple LaunchD plist job to illustrate how the keys work inside of a plist file. And then we'll cover my methodology for troubleshooting third-party launch daemons and agents. And finally, we'll wrap things up by I'll share some lists of third-party launch daemons and agents that I've collected over the years that I've put into the good, the bad, and the ugly categories to help you troubleshoot. There are 5 apps that I'll be using today that I find helpful when working with launch daemons and agents. The first one is TextEdit. It's free. It's included with the Mac OS. It's decent for viewing the contents of LaunchD plist files. However, it's not optimal for modifying or creating new LaunchD plist files because it can't unlock them. The second tool is Xcode. Xcode's also free. It's available from the Mac App Store. It's great for viewing the contents of LaunchD plist files because it has a nice GUI interface as opposed to just text. However, it's also not optimal for modifying or creating LaunchD plist files. In order to modify or create a LaunchD plist file, you have to change permissions and to allow you to edit it, and then you have to change them back when you're done. And Xcode does not do that. The next tool is BBEdit. BBEdit is $49.99 to license. It's from barebones.com. However, after the 30-day eval, it becomes Text Wrangler. They say on their website that it will run unlicensed, free forever, with a similar feature set to the now retired Text Wrangler app. It's very good for viewing the contents of LaunchD plist files, and it's great for modifying or creating them because it can successfully unlock the files, and it saves time in that regards. And I'll be using BBEdit when we modify and create LaunchD plist files here in the class. In the last, the next one is Lingon X. Lingon X is $10 to license. I would recommend you get it from peterborgapps.com. The unlicensed version will do everything except save. So in unlicensed mode, it's an excellent tool for looking at the contents of LaunchD plist files. I would avoid the Lingon 3 from the Mac App Store, even though this is also from Peter Borg. It's restricted because of Apple's limitations on what can be posted in the Mac App Store. It's also $10 to license, so if you're going to invest money, invest it in the Lingon X because it'll do more in regards to letting you edit things, especially at the system level. Lingon X is great for viewing the contents of LaunchD plist. It does it in a unique way, and I'll be demoing all this here shortly. And it also is great for modifying or creating the LaunchD plist files as long as you license it. And the last tool, the final app that I find helpful when working with launch daemons and agents is EtreCheck. EtreCheck is free from EtreCheck.com. If you're not familiar with EtreCheck, I want everyone to add this to your Mac support tool set. And I'll be demoing it briefly just to show you the small portion where it's helpful for troubleshooting launch daemons and agents. But this is a really excellent tool in general. It's open source, but they do encourage donations. And the one unique thing it does is it can show the load status of third-party launch daemons and agents. And that is a little confusing because just because a launch daemon or agent is in one of the folders, it doesn't mean it's necessarily loaded. And this does a good job of this. It's also excellent for identifying failed or suspicious launch daemon or agents. Unique in the tool set as far as I know. So now for an overview of LaunchD. LaunchD is the management system for starting and stopping Mac processes. It's proprietary to Apple. It was developed by Apple, and it was introduced with Mac OS 10.4. And it replaced cron, which Apple had been using to manage processes up until then. When you turn a Mac on, LaunchD is loaded very early in the startup process. And that startup process goes something like this. The open firmware initializes the hardware, and then it loads bootx, or sometimes referred as the booter. Bootx loads the kernel, and then the kernel loads LaunchD. And then LaunchD loads all of the launch daemons, and this is happening during the boot sequence prior to the login window. And then after a user logs in, LaunchD loads all of the launch agents. So during boot, the launch daemons are the very first thing to load, and launch daemons run regardless if a user is logged in or not. Launch daemons typically run as root, but they can be configured to run as a specific user. And launch daemons reside in system library launch daemons and library launch daemons. The system library launch daemons are the core daemons that Apple wants running at all times for the operating system to operate as expected. And it includes things like the login window and keychain. And these should not be messed with. And in fact, system integrity protection will prevent you from messing with them unless you disable that. The second location, library launch daemons, this is an empty folder by default, and it contains, or it may contain, third-party daemons that would be global to the system. Launch agents are sometimes referred to as user agents, and they are identical to launch daemons, except that they only run when a user is logged in. And when the user is logged off, they exit, they terminate. Launch agents run as the logged-in user, and they reside in system library launch agents, and in the home folder of the logged-in users, library launch agents. The system ones are the core ones that Apple wants running anytime a user is logged in, and they include things like the dock and Spotlight. The second folder, library launch agents, that is an empty folder by default, and so is the home library launch agent folder, and these may contain third-party launch agents. So to help illustrate how all this works, we're going to launch Activity Monitor, we're going to set it to view all processes, and then we're going to look at the PIDs. We're going to sort by the process IDs. So I'm going to switch to the Finder here and launch Activity Monitor. Now, Activity Monitor, when you launch it the first time on a system, it's going to default to My Processes, and that is not what we want. We want to set that to All Processes. And then we're going to sort it so the lowest PID is first, which is already sorted here. So see how PID starts at 0 and then goes up. And the process that's 0 is kernel task. So this is indicating that kernel task was the very first thing to load, And then the second one, PID number 1, is launch D. So this illustrates the boot sequence I just talked about. And if I click on launch D and do a get info, it says the parent is kernel task. And pretty much everything we're seeing here is a child of kernel task. So for example, if I find the login window, so here's the login window, and see login window has a PID of 123, so it was the 123rd thing process to load. And if I highlight it and click info, well, it is a parent of launch D. The same is true for like the doc. So all I'll do is search for the doc here. Doc is process ID 309. Do a get info. It's launch D. The finder loads shortly after that. It's process ID 313, and it's also launch D. And even apps that the user loads are a child of launch D. So I'm going to launch Chrome here. So I fired up Chrome. I'm going to switch back to Activity Monitor. Go to the very bottom, because it's going to be at the bottom of the list. So here's Google Chrome. It has a process ID of 742. And if I do an info on it, it is a parent of launch D. For the most part, everything here is parent of launch D, or child of launch D, except for processes that are spawned by other apps. And Chrome is an example of that. Chrome has a Google Chrome helper here that loaded shortly after. And if I do a get info on that, this is different than the other ones I just showed you. And this has a parent process of Google Chrome. Now, some additional things to mention. Not only does launchd load the processes, it also manages their running the way the developer intended them to. And this keeps the Mac running as smoothly, as speedy as possible if everything is set correctly. And a perfect example of this is the Finder, where if the Finder unexpectedly quits or you force quit it, it's going to immediately pop back up. It's going to immediately respawn itself, launch it. And launchd is the process that manages that behavior. Okay, so it's important to understand what a property list file is, or AKA a plist file. So when I say plist file, it's a property list file. And launch daemons and agents define their behavior in these launchd plist files. You can view the contents, as I've mentioned before, of these plist files with TextEdit, BBEdit, Xcode, or Lingon X. So I'm going to switch back to the Finder, and we'll take a launchd plist file, and we'll open it in all of these methods. So in the Finder, I'm going to navigate to Library Launch Agents. So I'm in the Launch Agents folder. So this is root level of the drive, Library Launch Agents. And we're going to take the one called Adobe AAM Updater 1.0. And let's start off by opening that in TextEdit. So I'll drag that down to TextEdit, which I have in the dock. And TextEdit is giving us the text content of that plist file. And in 15 minutes or so, after I show you how to dissect it, this will make a lot more sense. If we open this in BBEdit, drag it down to BBEdit, BBEdit is very similar. It just has some color coding to it. And in my opinion, it's a little easier to read. And let's open it in Xcode. Now, Xcode has a different GUI interface, makes this a little easier to read. So Xcode here, and not only is it a little cleaner, it condenses things. So see where it says ProgramArguments here? It has a little caret you can turn down. And if we go back and look at the raw text file, this is right in your face. So it's a little cleaner to read. And then there's Lingon X. Now, Lingon X, you don't actually open the plist in. You just open it in general, and it shows them to you in categories. So it breaks this down by me, and me would be things in the Home Library Launch Agents folder. All users are things in the Library Launch Agents folder, and root would be the Launch Daemons folder, the Library Launch Daemons folder. It'll also show you the System Launch Agents and System Launch Daemons if you click on View and go to System. But there's really not a need for it because we're not going to be messing with them. It's sometimes interesting to take a look how they work. And if we find the one we just opened, which is this one here, com.adobe AAM, it has a completely different way of showing this to you. It has like what to run here in a window with a test command, and it has checkboxes. And in my opinion, if you're a novice, this is definitely the way to go. Once you feel more familiar with launchd plist files, then BBEdit is perfectly acceptable. So sometimes it is helpful to dissect LaunchDPList files. And what I mean by dissect is to open the contents to figure out what it does. Because the plist file names aren't always self-explanatory. And if you're trying to figure out what is on your machine and is it necessary or not, the third-party items, the name is where you start. And if it says like something updater, then you're pretty sure that's a daemon to keep it updated. But sometimes the names are not really clear, and so it's helpful to dissect the file. LaunchDPList files are structured the same for both launch daemons and agents, so they use the exact same format. And LaunchDPLists use keys to define what they do. And those keys include things like what script or program should run and when at what frequency should it run. So at the core, that is what a LaunchDPList does. What do I run and when do I run it, or at what frequency? Some common LaunchD keys, plist keys that you'll see are label. Every LaunchDPList key has a key of label, and that's the name of the daemon. The program or the program arguments. And this is what should be run, or the command line arguments for what should be run. These are sometimes used interchangeably. They're sometimes used together. Run at load means if it's a daemon, does it load immediately when you turn the computer on? If it's an agent, does it run when the user logs in? KeepAlive is keep the process running at all times, like that Finder example I just gave. Start interval is start this process every so many seconds. And start calendar interval is scheduled start, like I want it to run on this day at this time. So let's take a crack at dissecting a few launch daemons and agents. Let's switch back. I've still got the Adobe AAM one open, and we'll go to Xcode, begin there. And we'll see that this one has a label and the name here. It has a program. So it's saying that this one is designed to run library application support Adobe. This is the path to the program. And we could actually go in the Finder and navigate to this. So if I go to folder, just go here. So we'll start out in library. So it goes library application support Adobe, OOBD. And then the next item in the path is actually an alias, but that's supported. Aliases are supported within the LaunchD system. If we double click on that, we'll see it actually directed us to Applications Utilities, Adobe Application Manager. And then from within here, they go into the UWA, and finally is this Unix executable. And that is what the plist file is actually running. This is the guts of it. So this particular plist file is running that Unix executable. And going back and looking at some more keys here, it also has program arguments. And program arguments will always be the program, but they'll have items 1, 0, and then it could be 2, 3, 4, 5. And these are things that you would, if you were going into the terminal and typing this in, this would be separated by the spaces. So if you were to want to run this manually in the terminal, you would go in and type in library all the way to startup utility, so updater utility space, and then you would do the option of -mode equals login. This one has run at load set to yes. And let's look at this exact same one over in Lingon X. So we still have it highlighted here. And it's a little cleaner for what you run. You can even click the test button if you want to fire it up. And it also has the run at load option set here. Let's open a different one. Let's open the one called the Oracle one. So notice right off the bat, this Oracle one, the com.oracle.java.updater.plist, this is an alias. And the original, if we do a get info, it points to something buried in the Internet Plugins folder. This is just the way that Java loads itself. And if we open that, take a look at it, this one has a program argument. So it does not have a program, but it has a program argument, and it's 2 strings. And basically, this is what you would type in the terminal if you wanted to run it. And again, it would be this separated by space here. It's also buried. This one has the start calendar interval. So if I look at this, it's set to run on the 10th hour, the 26th minute of the 5th day, which translates to 10:26 every Friday. So I don't know if you have Java loaded on your computer, if you've ever gotten a pop-up that says it's time to update Java, I guarantee it happened at 10:26 on a Friday, because that's just the way it's configured. Now, if we go back to Lingon and take a look at this exact same one, it's a little cleaner. Let's see, com.oracle. Right here. So see, Lingon X has a GUI interface for this. So it says schedule, day of the week, 10:26. And that just makes it a little cleaner. Let's do one more before we move on. And let's move the directories. We've been working in the library, and let's switch to the home folder. So we'll add a tilde to here. We're going to the home library launch agents folder. So again, this is my logged in user I'm at right now is MacTech. So it's in users, the username, library, launch agents. And let's take the one in here called Dropbox and open it. I'm going to open this one in BBEdit so we look at it a different view. Okay, so BBEdit. So we start here. It says key label, and then this is the value of that key. And then this is the program arguments, and then this is the three things that would show in the different programs we were just covering. Now this one has a start interval of 3,653, which means it's going to start roughly every 60 minutes, because that's in seconds. But this has some keys that we haven't talked about yet, like standard error path and standard out path. And there are over 50 different keys. So I gave you like 6 on screen, but there are about 50 different keys you can use. And so sometimes you have to look up what these mean. And I'm going to cover that on the next slide. You could just Google them and figure out what it is, but I have a little different method that I prefer. So this is when it comes to dissecting things. So before we continue on with that one, I want to mention that keys can be listed in any order. The label key does not have to be the very first key. It could be at the end or at the middle. The program key doesn't have to be in the middle or at the end. It can be the very first key. And the command that you would type into terminal to see all the keys is the man page for launchd.plist. So if you did man launchd.plist, it'll show you all the different keys. But better yet, I would recommend opening this man page in the terminal's Open with Man Page feature. And this will allow you to do things like search on it. Because when you just pull it up in the terminal, well, let me show you. I'll actually show it to you here. So let's hide. So I'm going to launch the terminal. And I'll first just bring it up. Man, launch D, plist. So this is the man page for launch D plist, and it's rather long. I'm going to press the space bar to go down one page at a time. You could press F and B or whatever your other terminal tricks are. But it's listing all the different keys you could do. Exit timeout, init groups. But there's really no great way to search here. But what's that? Forward and slash are ways to navigate? Forward slash. I'm hitting forward slash. See, it's... Oh, now type something. Okay. Yeah, okay. All right, and then how do you do next? What? Enter. In. See, I wouldn't remember that. Okay, so this is great. I love that because this is the kind of stuff I learned. I didn't know that terminal trick. But this is what I picked up yesterday. Let's see, now I got to break out of this. If you just take the command and right-click on it and go open in man page, the terminal will open it in a separate window, but this window is scroll up and down and searchable with the Command F feature. So whichever way you're comfortable with. And what I wanted to do is I'm going to tear apart one of the system ones. And I said don't go into system, launch agents, and daemons, but looking at it's not going to do any harm. So I'm going to, in the Finder, I'm going to go to Folder, and let's go to System, Library, and let's go into the Launch Agents folder. And we're going to open the Siri one. So we'll go to com.siri. And this one uses some keys that are a little unique. It uses things like mock services, throttle interval, process type, POSIX spawn type. And so if you were trying to figure out what do these mean, the man page would be excellent. Now, if you Googled it, you might find outdated information. Although the LaunchD system hasn't changed much over the years, you might find something that's like 10.6 specific. So that's why I would prefer using the man page. So let's use this throttle interval. They've got throttle interval set to 1, and if we switch back to the man page and do a find for throttle, so here's the throttle interval, and it talks about what the throttle interval key does. And it basically says that key keeps the process from responding more than once every 10 seconds. And Apple has overridden that behavior to 1 because they really want Siri to be running. If it quits, it needs it to fire right back up. So that's just an example of going in and looking at the man page to help figure out what the more unusual keys do. Thanks for the tip. So all of the keys pretty much follow the same rules except for the disabled key. And the disabled key, it's a key and you can set it to yes. And if you set the disabled key to yes, it basically means that plist file can be in one of those folders, but LaunchD won't load it. And that's really self-explanatory. The key is unless it's in the override database. And things get confusing really quickly when you start talking about the override database. I'm only going to touch on it briefly in this session because I could spend 30, 45 minutes talking about the nuances of it. I'm going to pull up a web page, which I have listed here, that goes into detail on it pretty good. But what you need to know is just that it exists. So let's take a look at this closer. If I go, let's pull up that web page and go to the site I showed you and go to the Operations tab. And then in this page, it's going to break down the override database. So it's basically saying that you can go in with a command line tool and you can set a daemon to permanently not run or to permanently run. Even if the disabled key is set to true, you can override that or vice versa. And that is tracked, although it's called the override database, it's actually 2 files. And those files' locations are different in different versions of Mac OS. So there's not a lot of consistency to it. And starting with 10.10, the entries are pretty much permanent. You can add things to the override database, but you can't easily pull them out. You can go in and do it from recovery mode. So Apple allows you to do it from recovery mode. But starting with 10.11, now they require you that you disable system integrity protection to be able to pull things out of recovery mode. So it's complicated. It's not used that often. I just want you to know that it exists. And then if you want to read more about it, go to the web page that I gave you. But what it boils down to is setting the disabled key to yes is not a guarantee that the process is disabled, or having it not set to yes is not a guarantee the process is disabled. And if a developer chooses to use an override, it's a one-way path that can't easily be removed. So with all this override database confusion, how can you tell which LaunchD plists are actually enabled? Well, you could run this command, launch control or launch CTL space list, and this will show you all of the launch daemons and agents that are currently loaded and running. Or better yet, you could run EtreCheck. And EtreCheck gives you a status report of all of the third-party launch daemons and agents and whether they're loaded or running or failed. I prefer EtreCheck, but I will use launch control here in an example shortly. So while it's not very common, you can actually edit these third-party launch plist files if you want. But remember, you would only want to modify the ones in the library folder, and you would not want to attempt to modify the ones in the system library folders. So changes to LaunchD plist files are not dynamic. If you make a change to a daemon, you need to reboot, or if you make a change to an agent, you need to log out or log back in, or you can use command line to unload and load the agent or daemon. So you could do launch control load or launch control or unload. And when you're troubleshooting stuff and you pull these out, I just reboot personally. But if you're doing stuff on the fly and you're trying to do it as quickly as possible, you can use the terminal commands. So I'm going to make a modification to a user agent plist and then make it live. As I mentioned before, you would want to do this in BBEdit or the registered version of Lingon X. And I'm going to navigate to Library Launch Agents. And we're going to take the one called Epson ESUA. And I'm going to, first of all, I'm just going to open that in Xcode. So Xcode has a little lock symbol up here. And if you click it, it says, do you want to unlock it? Sure. But it fails. And if it did work, what it would do is it would set the permissions of the file to allow you to edit it, and as soon as you save it, it would set it back. And that's exactly what BBEdit does. So I'm going to launch this in BBEdit. So here is this one, and this particular one is trying to launch the Epson software update. It's set to do it on a schedule on the 12th hour, or noon on weekdays, basically. So I'm going to edit this. I'm going to change it just to start interval instead of start calendar interval. And BBS is going to ask if I want to unlock. And I'm just going to strip this out and this. I'm going to change the behavior of this to tell it to load every 10 seconds. So I've set this to 10. I've saved it. Okay, so now that I've changed it, it doesn't kick in automatically. If I rebooted, it would kick in. If this is an agent, so if I logged out or logged back in, it would kick in. But in order to get it to work without rebooting or logging in and out, we need to use the command line. And so I'm going to open two windows here. And first of all, I'm going to run the launch control list, and I'm going to grep out anything with Epson. So this would show me all the loaded launch daemons and agents, but I'm grepping out just things that have Epson. And it comes back with one item. This is saying that that is currently loaded. And if we go over to this command here, if I go unload and then specify the path, no, you're right. Sorry, thank you. We got to go launch control, unload. Okay, so I didn't complete it there. I did complete it here. So now it's unloaded. So if I go back and reissue this command, it comes back with nothing. And if I come back here and change this to load, I've now loaded it. And here in about 10 seconds, it'll kick in, and I'll have the Epson updater say, hey, you want to update? So let's say about 3, 2, 1, there we go. So there it is. Do you want to update? I'm going to say no, and then I'm going to change this back real quickly. I'm going to unload it, and then I'm going to do an undo until I get back to the original here, save this, close it, and then go back to terminal here and reload it. So that's just an example of making a modification in one of these files and kicking it in. Creation is very similar. Creating your own launch DP list files is very similar to modifying them. These are the locations you could potentially do this in, which are the library launch daemons agents or the home library launch agents folder. The name format should be something like com.developer.thejob, kind of what it does, .plist. And again, they don't kick in dynamically. You either have to reboot, log in or out, or issue the commands to unload or to load them. When you're creating things, you have to make sure they have the right permission. If you're working with plist files in the library folder, they need these permissions. If you're working in the home library folder, they need these permissions. However, if you use BBEdit, it pretty much does this for you because of its ability to lock and unlock. So I'm going to, in BBEdit, I'm going to make a new doc, and I'm going to save it. I'm going to call it com.johnkirn.test.plist. And I'm going to save it in the launch agents folder, the library launch agents folder. So now I've got a new blank one there. And then when I make these plist files, I just open another one and copy and paste the guts of the basic format, because all of them use XML format. So I'm going to grab this top section and this bottom section. So all the launchd plist files have this common structure to begin with. And then I'm also going to grab the label, because we have to have a name. And I'm going to call that exactly the same as my plist is called. And then I got to have the payload, like what's it going to do? And I've kind of prepped, instead of typing this all out manually, I've prepped some code here. Just going to copy and paste that in. So what this is doing is running a program. It's actually running the screen capture command, and it's saying run at load, which means when this agent loads to run it immediately. And then I've also got the start interval set to 30, which is every 30 seconds. So I'm going to clean this up a little bit by stripping out the spaces I put in to help read it. And save. So I now have my plist file created, but I have to load it for it to kick in. So in the terminal, and again, I could log in and log out, or I could reboot, but we're going to do launch control, load. Okay, it's now loaded. So it's running. Now it's a background process, so you don't see it, because it's not an app that jumps in my face. But if we go back and look at the code that I put in, it's running screen capture, and it's saving screen capture to var temp, and then it's giving it a name for the PNG. So if we want to see this in action, I'll go here. Let's see, I'll make a new, go to folder, we'll do var temp. And this is the first screen capture that it took when it immediately loaded, and this is the one it just took 30 seconds later. So this is the first one, and this is the second one. And this will continue taking screenshots of my machine indefinitely whenever it's on and a user's logged in. Kind of malware, but it's just an example of how you could do it. It's not making the little click-click noise because I used the -X option in my command. So I don't want to do this anymore. So let's go back to terminal and let's unload this. And now I'm going to get rid of the actual file so it doesn't kick in. So I've deleted it. Okay, so that is creating one. So everything I've just shown you, you can find online. I haven't shown you anything unique. Although, and it's very unlikely you'll ever need to create or modify your own launchd plist files. Or for that matter, you probably don't even need to be concerned with the overwrite database or using the command line to load and unload these plist files. But it is good to know from troubleshooters what this all means, so when you see it in reference, you get it. And what it boils down to is, all that's good to understand in general, but really you need to understand how to troubleshoot for unnecessary, troublesome, or even potentially malicious third-party launch daemons and agents. And that's what I'm going to show you now. My methodology is pretty straightforward, and it's helped me resolve countless of issues, Mac problems that have stumped other engineers that I've assisted. So here's my methodology. Be suspicious of anything in these three folders, because they're all empty by default. The library launch daemons, library launch agents, and home library launch agents. These are empty by default, and if the folders contain anything that doesn't end in .plist, it doesn't belong there, and it's likely malware. The sources of the things that you may potentially find in these folders, one of the sources is required components of installed software, and so that's legit things you need to run. Remnants of old software that's no longer used, leftovers from previous macOS upgrades, migration assistance tag-alongs, things that have been pulled over by a migration assistant, and pup stowaways, potentially unwanted programs like adware and malware, often installed by Trojan horses. If not self-explanatory, view the contents of the launchd plist to figure out what it does. So some of them have names that are very self-explanatory and you can tell what it does, or you can Google it. But if you can't, open it to see what it does. When you do open these plist files to figure out what they're doing, focus on the program or program argument keys, because this is the meat. This is what it's executing. There is no special uninstall process, in my opinion. If you find a plist that doesn't belong, just remove it. If you're not really sure, you can put it in a folder on the desktop called, like, I don't know about this. If you're really sure it doesn't need it, then just throw it away, and then reboot the computer. Yes, you could log in and log out, and you could do it from the command line, but that's just my process. I've done it for years. It's never hurt anything. Also, get in the habit of running EtreCheck to identify LaunchD jobs that have failed to load and figure out why. So let's get EtreCheck running. And when you launch EtreCheck, it's going to ask, what problem are you troubleshooting? It doesn't matter what you pick here. You could choose anything. And we're going to get it started. It does take a while to run. And this was born from the Apple support community, where people would go onto the support forums and say, I'm having this problem. And the people that were helping would say, well, what kind of Mac do you have? How much RAM? What's left on the hard drive? What's the smart status? And so this tool gathers all this. It's like system information on steroids. And it presents it in a text format that you can copy and paste. And that's where this was born from. Now, while it's running, I want to demo looking at a plist file that's not really self-explanatory what it does. So we've got this one. I'm sure you've all seen it. com.google.keystoneagent.plist. That's a great example of a plist file, LaunchD plist file that doesn't really make sense. What is keystone? I mean, the only keystone I know is beer and I don't know. So, but if you actually were to look at the contents of it, you'll see that it is loading in the program arguments section. It's loading the Google software update. So the name was not self-explanatory. By looking at the contents, we figured out what it does. Okay, so back to EtreCheck. So here it is checking the daemons and agents. See, it's got this cute little demon, and then pretty soon it's going to have like the spy agent showing up here on the right-hand side. Now there's the spy. And in here shortly, it's going to give us a text file of everything on the computer. So if you're troubleshooting something remotely, you could ask the user to run this and copy and paste it to you. Like if you don't have time to get to everything, you say run EtreCheck, copy and paste everything, and send it to me in an email. And I do this on a regular basis, or have our engineers do it and give it to me. Because this file is going to have everything about that computer. I'm going to say I'm going to give them money later. So it starts off with basic stuff that you would see in system information. But for the purpose of moving things along, I'm going to go right down to the agents section. So we got launch agents. This would be library launch agents. We have launch daemons, library launch daemons, and we have user launch agents. And we got some red stuff here. Well, it says that the com.eaus data protect plist, it's pointing to something that doesn't exist anymore. It says executable not found. Well, right there, that's one you don't need. That can be pulled out. But this is still managed by LaunchD. So LaunchD is going to try to run this on whatever schedule. This is going to clutter up your system log files with errors. And here's another one here. This one failed to load. This is actually a really old component of Adobe DC, the Acrobat Reader thing, that doesn't, it references things that don't exist anymore. So if you were to tear this apart, it's trying to curl something that doesn't exist. And so anything that's failed or that load, then you don't need. This also gives you a nice interface of what's loaded and not loaded. So if it says not loaded, that's basically, it's either got the disabled key set or it's in the override database. Blue is loaded, meaning that it's loaded, and green is running and loaded. I wish I could show you more on EtreCheck. I might actually try to do a session on it next year because I get a lot of value out of EtreCheck. So I'll be wrapping up the session today by sharing some lists of plist files that I've collected over the years that I'm categorizing in the good, which is typically considered safe or normal, the bad or potentially bad, which are the things that could be legitimate, but they really should be verified, and the ugly, and these are the known pup troublemakers, the adware and malware. So this, and I know this is kind of hard to see small up here, but when you get the slide deck, you'll be able to go into more detail. These are third-party daemons and agents that I personally consider safe, and when I see them, I don't give them a second thought. And you'll likely agree with me on most of these, and you'll almost definitely have additional ones to add to the list, like whatever you're using for your Mac RMM or your Mac antivirus, if you're using antivirus, or if you're using Jamf or any of that stuff, they would show here. So this will be in the slide deck you'll get, but this is just my personal go-to. Now, Unfortunately, Apple doesn't always follow by their own rules, and I told you this is all third-party things, but if you notice over here under Launch Agents, there's some com.apple ones. So, I mean, 99% of them are third-party. But if you do something like turn on folder actions, it puts a launch agent plist in your home library launch folder. Okay, so these are the ugly. So these are ones that are known troublemakers, and they fall into the category of the pups and are considered malware or adware. And if you find any of these on a Mac, it's pretty much a giveaway. You've got a lot more that you need to be concerned with. And I personally recommend, if you find any of these, that you download Malwarebytes and run it as soon as possible. Because Malwarebytes will find all the other pieces of this. Because the plist is just a part of it. It's probably got guts in the application support folder or whatnot. Now, this is just the ones that I've personally run up against in the last few years. There are over 200 known ones, and I've included a little tiny URL here, and I'm going to show it to you here real quick. So this is that tiny URL, and it refreshes to the GitHub for EtreCheck, the program I just showed you. Because EtreCheck, when it scans your daemon plist file, your launch plist files, it looks for troublemakers. And if you look, and this file, by the way, is updated on a regular basis. Their GitHub is live. And if we go down here into the section called Blacklist, anything in the blacklist is things that are bad. And there are over 200 here. And eventually, it'll get down into this thing called Blacklist Match. So if it finds any of these names, like Beard Pond, then it says, yeah, that's bad. Okay? Okay, so now we move on to the potentially bad. And these things could very well be legitimate. But you'll almost always, if you have a group of Macs, you'll find things that aren't needed. You'll find remnants from old software that's no longer used, or you'll find remnants of previous computers that use Migration Assistant on. So here is 2 examples, and then we'll be done with the class. The first example, this is a typical Mac. This is what it has in the library launch daemons folder, the library launch agents folder, and the home library launch agents folder. And I start off by identifying the ones that I consider typically safe. These are the ones that are on the list that I showed you. Mark them as green for this example and move on. Then we've got these ones from Parallels. So notice these all start com.parallels, com.parallels. And you have to ask, is Parallels being used on this Mac? Just because installed doesn't mean it's being used. They might have installed Parallels version 4 years and years and years ago. If it is being used, you would leave it. But if it's not being used, you'd want to pull these out, remove them. Next one is TeamViewer. And you have to ask the question, is this Mac configured to allow people unattended remote access in via TeamViewer? Because that's what these things do. And if the machine is not supposed to be remoted in remotely using TeamViewer unattended, then those should be pulled out. And then we got some rim.bb daemons. I see these on a regular basis, even though no one uses BlackBerry devices anymore. This is the BlackBerry software. And you will see this, and you'll see modification dates of like 2009. That's also a dead giveaway. So you would want to ask that question. And then the last one in this example is Citrix Online GoToMeeting. If the user of the Mac never uses GoToMeeting to do conference calls, or they did it like once a couple years ago, then this can get rid of. If they use it on a regular basis, then you would leave it. Here's my second example. This is similar, but it's got a twist at the end. So we start off by identifying the ones I consider typically safe, mark them as green. And then these are all ones com.bitdefender. So we got to ask the question, is Bitdefender installed on the computer legitimately? Was it done on purpose? Is this a corporate piece of software? Or was it something the user thought they had a Mac virus, and they downloaded this to see, and then they forgot about it and left it? Because these are the things that cause machines to be unstable and slow and intermittent. So if it's legit, you would leave it. If not, you would pull it. And again, when I say pull it, I just mean take it out of the folder. Either throw it away or put it on a folder in the desktop and reboot, and that kicks it in and gets rid of it. Then we got Cisco AnyConnect. So if the machine is actually using Cisco AnyConnect to VPN into another network, then you would leave it. If it's not, then you would remove it. We got some Wacom tablet things, com.wacom. This is another one I see on a regular basis where someone used to have a tablet a long time ago. They don't have it anymore, but the software's still there. It's been pulled over. And then finally, we got this one called PIA Manager. And I've seen this a couple times. First time I saw it, I'm like, what is this? I don't know what this is. If you Google it, you come up with some vague things. It's blurry on the screen, I know, but like it's beach ball of death and cursor freeze. But an initial Google search won't really say what PIA manager is. So what do? You dissect it. You open the thing and you look at the content. And sure enough, if you're looking at the contents of the plist file, it's opening something in applications called private internet access. It's an app. All right, now that we've figured out what it does, you got to ask, is this user using the app named private internet access to VPN into another network? And if they aren't, then you get rid of it. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you so much. Went right up to the wire.
Yeah, I know.
No, that's awesome.
But you guys got any questions, come hunt me down in the hallway, or if you got advice.
Right, I was just going to say, John's going to be around. You can continue the conversation in the hallway, which is awesome. There you go, thank you.